To speak to all of you once again in these beautiful, blessed days that Allah has selected and favored over other days. You have, I'm sure, by this point heard many, many times the hadith from Bukhari about the virtue of these days, where it is reported that the Rasul said, "ما من أيام العمل الصالح فيها أحب إلى الله من هذه الأيام." يعني أيام العشر, that there are no other days in which good actions, righteous actions are more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than in these days. So we want to try to show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as much righteous action from us as we can sustain, inshallah, with the happiness of our hearts without burdening ourselves and not losing consistency. So one of the best days, I was thinking about what to do for this series and for my Dhul Hajj series. And one of the best deeds I concluded that we can perform is to become more familiar with those who are beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These days are the best days of the year as they are attached to one of the greatest prophets of all times, Ul Azm, Ibrahim alayhi salam. So one of the best ways to celebrate these days is to celebrate those personalities that are celebrated in the Quran by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. And the foremost of those personalities are his Anbiya. And then among his Anbiya are the Ulul Azm. And then of the Ulul Azm is Ibrahim alayhi salam, who is tied to these days, who was befriended by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. He is that great prophetic figure that is recognized and undisputed in all three monotheistic faith traditions. Muslims, Jews, and Christians all look up to him, all claim him. Even the mushrikeen of the Quraysh used to take pride in their association with Ibrahim alayhi salam. All of the scriptures speak highly of him. He is a prophetic figure to all. So how did Ibrahim alayhi salam reach this elevated status? What are the lessons that we can learn from the events of his life? If we study his seerah, we certainly find distinguishing traits that uniquely set his struggle apart, that are going to answer some of these questions that we have raised. What made Ibrahim alayhi salam Allah's friend? How did he earn the khulla, the friendship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You know, all of us, we want to be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We even dare to dream of his friendship. But what does it take? How can we get there? What is the path that Khalilullah walked upon? And if there is one word to describe his path, it is a path of sacrifice, a path of giving up everything and anything as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala required it. Whatever the mission called for, whatever the divine demanded, he was ready to give it up for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what made him do that from such a young age? When we see him in Iraq for the first time, we see that he begins his path of sacrifice. What sustains him throughout is life, sacrificing, passing test after test, is his first trait that I want to talk about today, his qalbun salim, his sound heart, to which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself testifies, إِذْ جَاءَ رَبَّهُ بِقَلْبٍ salim, when he came to his Lord with a sound heart. This is how he begins his path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is very young, but he has that a most potent aid, the qalbun salim, that untainted fitra, which empowered him in spite of the idolatrous nation that he was growing up in. It guided, all of these things guided him to Tawheed. And it is through Ibrahim alayhi salam's story that we see the amazing benefits of using your God-given intellect. We see the fruits of tadabbur, the fruits of pondering over the universe and leading one to Tawheed in the example of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And this is something we're actually commanded to undertake in the Quran, to ponder Allah's signs. So some ayat are those that are read as we recite the book of Allah, and others are those ayat which are observed, seen in the universe, in the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these are also our direct connectors to Allah. They introduce us to our Creator and His magnificence and His perfection by which He has made the creation. And Ibrahim alayhi salam also looks towards the creation. We see his story in Surah Al-An'am, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَذَلِكَ نُرِي إِبْرَاهِيمَ مَلَكُوتَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَلِيَكُونَ مِنَ الْمُوقِنِينَ فلما جن عليه الليل رأى كوكبا قال هذا ربي فلما أفل قال لا أحب الآفلين فلما رأى القمر بازغا قال هذا ربي فلما أفل قال لئن لم يهدني ربي لأكونن من القوم الضالين فلما رأى الشمس بازغة قال هذا ربي هذا أكبر فلما أفلت قال يا قوم إني بريء مما تشركون. We also showed Ibrahim the wonders of the heavens and the earth, so he would be sure in faith. When the night grew dark upon him, he saw a star and said, "This is my Lord." But when it set, he said, "I do not love things that set." Then when he saw the moon rising, he said, "This one is my Lord." But when it disappeared, he said, "If my Lord does not guide me, I will certainly be one of the misguided people." Then when he saw the sun shining, he said, "This must be my Lord. It is the greatest and the biggest." But again when it set, he declared, "O my people, I totally reject whatever you associate with Allah in worship." Now, here it's important to note that this does not mean that Ibrahim alayhi salam at any point started worshipping any of these objects. He never worshipped the star, the sun, the moon. We know from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he was Hanif, right? He was ma kana min al-mushrikeen, right? He was not from the mushrikeen. He never associated anyone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But rather, here this process that he's going through was an intellectual consideration put forth before his people to whom he was giving dawah. Remember, he remained with his people for quite some time, right? He was their prophet. He was giving dawah to them. He was appealing to them logically. So, here in his observation of the universe, it is as if he's thinking out loud, sharing his thinking, and thereby logically concluding publicly that, look, these things that fade away, these things that have a setting time, when these things, they have a time where they disappear, you can no longer access them, these cannot be God. But the one who originated them, that must be their God and the God of you and I. So this is where he makes the public declaration, walking his people logically through his out loud process of elimination, right? Why none of these can be gods, and then logically, rationally concluding, "Inni wajjahtu wajhiya lilladhi fatara as-samawati wal arda hanifa wa ma ana min al-mushrikeen." I have turned my face towards the one who has originated the heavens and the earth, being upright, and I am not one of the polytheists. I'm not of the mushrikeen. This tawheed, this belief in one God, was the most and is the most grounding belief. This is that thing which really anchors you and empowers you to navigate this world properly as you turn your face fully and exclusively to the one and the only one worthy of your full exclusive devotion. And this is what this tawheed, this recognition of Allah as the only God and a rejection of all else and everything else, this yaqeen and conviction, the truth of this, empowered Ibrahim alayhi salam to turn his back on his entire nation, on his father, on his tribe. He was ready at this point to even die for the truth if that's what was demanded. He was ready now to risk everything, ready to be thrown into the fire. This is the spirit with which Ibrahim alayhi salam makes his debut onto the world scene. Now, if we just stop for a moment and think about when we first started practicing Islam, or when we first converted, many of us, have experienced an increased passion at the beginning of our personal spiritual dawns, which quell too often and cool with the passage of time. But Ibrahim alayhi salam's fire, we will see, is never put out. After the one that was made salaman and bardan was made, bardan wa salama was made coolness and safety for Ibrahim alayhi salam. After that fire was put out by the Lord of Ibrahim, or it did not harm him, subhanallah, it the fire of Iman, the passion of Iman, the enthusiasm of Iman was never put out in Ibrahim alayhi salam. Throughout the years, his passion burned steadfastly as he purified himself further and further by Allah's grace as he passed test after test. And so this is why I wanted to dedicate the 2 sessions that I have here with you all to Ibrahim alayhi salam. The first lesson that we learn among the many, many lessons that Ibrahim alayhi salam teaches us is that when the truth is found through a conscious, a keen self-searching process and with sincerity and eagerness, that produces a much deeper level of Iman, a much higher standard of adherence to the faith, something that is not going to quickly quell or cool. It is when one uses one's intellect, thinks carefully and deeply, not just accepting what is around you, not just following whatever societal trends that you happen to be born into, rather preserving your fitrah in spite of the corruption around you, and then contemplating the various signs of God through which He also talks to us. It is not just the revelation that He communicates with us, but He also introduces us to Himself through these external signs that you and I can observe. So getting to know Allah in this way, thinking, observing, pondering, preserving the fitrah, this is going to result in that more serious and sustained commitment to deen that we all dream of, that we all desire. This is going to lead to that sustained commitment versus if Islam is simply inherited as a family faith. What this means is that our deen merits deep consideration, it merits deep study, without which such fruits of Iman can simply not be produced. So we find Ibrahim alayhi salam to be an example of someone who questions the system. He is born in Iraq, in Ur, and he thinks critically about the status quo. He does not accept the idolatry that is around him, that his father is an active participant in, who happened to be a carpenter who would carve out, actually make the idols that then the people would purchase from him. So subhanallah, he literally was born into a house of idolatry, but he did not accept that. So it is possible to come out with the victory of your fitrah, sound heart, that can recognize Tawheed and reject all else that is in opposition to that spiritual blueprint, which is our fitrah. Subhanallah, this is one of the many, many lessons that Ibrahim alayhi salam teaches us, and there's so much more to say, but inshallah, we're going to end here and continue our learning from Ibrahim alayhi salam, inshallah, on our session on Thursday, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Thank you for joining and listening. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.